What's up, YouTube? In today's video, I want to talk about the first Descendant. Specifically, I want to talk about the first Descendant Season 1, which came out a couple days ago, August 29th. So this is the first major content release and update for the first Descendant, and with it came a lot of quality of life improvements and also a new main story segment. And in this main story segment, it is the Haley rescue operation, as well as a new sort of power advancement for your characters. They're calling it the inversion reinforcement. And what the inversion reinforcement is, it seems like it's abilities that you can acquire the more you complete the events within the season. You know, things that buff your character with special stacks and abilities over time to make certain content easier, etc. You get your first taste of the inversion reinforcement right before you do the special operation for Haley, which is the new Frost Descendant in the first Descendant. Before you go rescue Haley, you get enough energy to go one tier into the inversion reinforcement. You'll be able to get more energy over time after you rescue Haley, do her special operation, and then you continue doing some world missions related to the events in Season 1. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. First, I want to talk about the Haley rescue operation. So I hopped on with my boys, and we were doing some of the main story quests that were added in Season 1, and we were having a good time, relatively easy. All of us are well into hard mode at this point, so we were breezing through them, no problem. And then we got to the Haley special operations mission, which when we noticed that it was a solo mission, similar to like the bunny quest. It ended with a solo expedition, a solo dungeon. The Haley rescue operation mission is a solo dungeon that you can do with any one of your descendants that you choose. And I see this as a major L. Like, I mean, the first Descendant is a team game. Yes, you can play it solo, but at the end of the day, you want to be able to play with people. It's a multiplayer game, and to force you into a solo operation, something that isn't related to a singular descendant, like the bunny one made sense to me, right? Like, you're playing through this bunny quest, and at the very end, you have a dungeon that you have to complete as Bunny to get her to end the quest and get a cutscene related to Bunny ending her quest line. So all that makes sense to me. What doesn't make sense to me is the Haley special operations mission being a solo quest that you can do with any descendant. Like, why couldn't you do it with a group of your friends and just make the enemies stronger or something with the more people that you have in your party? Like, at the end of the day, it's a multiplayer game. You should be able to play with as many people as you want, or at least a party of 4, you know, to do this content, to do the new content. But regardless, we beat the Haley operations. It was a very unique design. I mean, it's its own dungeon, kind of. I mean, it does look very familiar to one of the dungeons that you beat in the game, especially the boss at the end. It's very similar, but the first 2 areas are kind of unique in a sense. And on top of that, there's a new puzzle added to the game to progress further within the dungeon, where you have to zip line up to a pad, and once you're standing on the pad, the other pads on the floor indicate colors which match the colors to the door. So what you got to do is you go up to the pad, you zip line to the pad, you see what colors there are on the floor, memorize them, and then stand on the pads that have the same color as the keys or the locks to the door that you see at the end of the area. And, you know, while doing all this, you're fighting waves of enemies, what we expect out of the first Descendant. So you memorize the patterns on the floor, you stand on the colors that are associated with the door, you hold those, and then you open the door, and then progress onto the other area, which has the same exact thing, but you got to do it twice over. So you get up to the pad, you match the colors to the floor, you know, and then it resets the colors on the floor. Then you go up to the pad again, see the colors, do it again. While doing that, you have to make sure that you shoot the enemies that have an exclamation point, the red exclamation point on the top of their head. If those enemies end up getting to one of the colored pads on the floor that you've opened, they can reset it. So you want to make sure that you're killing all the enemies while you're trying to open the door, matching the colors. And then at the end, you'll be confronted with a boss who has an invulnerability shield around them. On the outside of that shield is a color similar to the other two areas before you get to the boss, you'll need to stand on the color that is the shield of the boss in that arena. And while you're standing on that color, you can shoot and break the shield of the boss, destroying his invulnerability and eventually being able to do damage to that boss. Doing all these things solo is kind of frustrating. It's not that difficult, but I mean, it adds a level of difficulty for sure. I mean, especially depending on what Descendant you're using. I mean, I did it with Viessa, Ultimate Viessa, so I was a very DPS oriented Descendant, so I was able to eliminate a lot of the extra adds as well as do enough damage to the boss to defeat them relatively quickly. Now, after you defeat the boss at the end of the Haley operation, there is a little cutscene that introduces Haley as a new acquirable Descendant. Once you defeat the area and you finish that operation, Haley is now in Albion. She is the first Descendant with her RK that is now introduced in the Albion. So this is the first that's ever happened in the first Descendant. I don't think there's been any other Descendant that's been added to the Albion. So, you know, Haley is our first one, you know, in season 1 that we get to add to our arsenal of Descendants that haven't already been in Albion. So, for example, Luna was added in the preseason, but she was part of the story. She was a character within the story, the main story, but she wasn't playable. And then they made her playable in the preseasons. But Haley is a new Descendant being added to Albion that we have not seen yet before. So after the Haley operation, you know, there is another series of quests that you're able to do as a multiplayer party, as a team, until you get to the new invasion missions, which are these events that are taking place. So you go to your world map, and usually within the span of a few hours, they reset each area, but 2 of the several areas that you have access to. In this video, you'll see that we had the Sterile Lands as well as Hagios. In those 2 areas, you'll have special missions within the dungeons, the normal dungeons, that are now being classified as invasions. And for some reason, these invasions are solo missions. They're solo missions, and I don't get it. It's a multiplayer game. You should be able to do this extra content as a party, as a multiplayer party. There's no option to do these invasions as a party. You only can do them solo, which is a huge L in my opinion. I mean, we were able to defeat the Sterile Lands one twice, and then that erased the option for Sterile Lands. And then I tried the Hagios one, and it was borderline impossible as Ultimate Viessa. I got griefed at the boss. I don't know. You're able to get energy from these missions that'll eventually allow you to upgrade your reinforcement, your invasion reinforcement, give yourself more buffs to do these special operations, to do these invasions. I don't know if it's enough. And another way to get energy is to actually just do quests or little side quests within the areas that are highlighted in red that have these invasion missions. So you can go to the areas with your party, to the world areas, like for example Sterile Lands. I could have went to Sterile Lands if it was highlighted in red, if there was an invasion in Sterile Lands, and I can gather energy that way by doing strategic outposts, by doing void fusion reactors, by doing little goofy things like shooting ammo supplies. You have to shoot like 25 ammo supplies. There's a list of things that you can do to gain energy to be able to get more of those stacked bonuses for your invasion reinforcement. But the main quest you can't progress past the main quest until you do 10 of the invasion dungeons. Like I said, I was only able to do the 2 in Sterile Lands, and I was unable to do the Hagios one, but they do reset. So hopefully there are easier ones either in Kingston or Agna Desert, depending on how those ones operate. The dungeons themselves are difficult, especially as a solo player. A lot of it is just defeating waves of enemies, collecting little resources that drop from the enemies, and then transporting them to a vessel. And you have to do that until you get a 100% on the vessel, and then you progress into the next area. And then at the very end, you'll have a boss who is immune until you collect more resources, put it into a box, break the immunity, similar to like the other 2 areas before you get to the boss, adding an extra layer of difficulty, because while you're collecting all the resources now, you are also trying to avoid damage taken from the boss. But these missions are so fun and unique to the first Descendant, something that we haven't had to do yet. So it's a fresh take on the dungeons that we've been running over and over and over again, which is great, but it's so limiting having to do with solo. It boggles my mind. In a multiplayer game, you have these dungeons, which you have to win and run 10 of them, which is difficult and very time consuming and repetitive. But to do it as a solo just makes no sense to me. I mean, it's a perfect opportunity for the game and the developers to have you run it as a party, and just make it more difficult if you're running it as a party. Like, scale it up. That's fine. I don't think anybody would be mad at that. And scale it down if you're running solo. Like, keep it the same difficulty that you have it now. Make it a little bit more difficult. Maybe more enemies spawn, whatever it may be, with the more people that you add to your party. Like they do with any other dungeon. And, you know, intercept battle. I don't get it. I really don't get it. I mean, it seems like a huge missed opportunity to have in a multiplayer game like the first Descendant to have these solo operations. I mean, overall, I mean, it might get easier over time to do it solo. The more invasion, reinforcement, and energy you unlock, you add more buffs and stacks to your Descendant, hopefully making it easier to defeat these invasion dungeons over time as a solo. But I just see it as a missed opportunity to make these operations multiplayer. You know, it would even be more fun to go into the invasion areas in the map and collect more energy as a party to buff yourselves, to make yourselves stronger, and then as a party go into the dungeon, go into the invasion, and try to complete it that way. But I don't, you know, it seems like they're forcing this more solo route in season 1, which seems like a waste. It seems like that's not what a multiplayer game should be focusing on, is forcing players into solo operations. Giving them the option to do solo operations is fine, but to force them into solo operations doesn't make sense to me. It just seems like a waste for a multiplayer game to do things like that. Overall, I haven't completed the main story quests. Like I said, I've done 2 out of the 10 invasion dungeons. But currently, with the Haley operations, the added puzzles that needed to be solved in certain dungeons, as well as this new way of buffing your Descendant and your character for the duration of the season with the invasion reinforcement, as well as adding Haley, who is a phenomenal Descendant, and the now second chill Descendant added to the arsenal of Descendant, which is great because a variety of Descendants that are related to attributes is great. To have more options for attributed Descendants is great. So now it's not just Viessa, you have Haley as another chill Descendant. You know, with all these things being considered, I think I would rate the invasion season 1 invasion of the first Descendant, I'd probably rate it a 6 out of 10. I mean, I don't see myself wanting to grind too much of it, just because it sucks not being able to play with friends, not being able to play in a multiplayer setting and work as a team. But the added quality of life changes, as well as Descendants, as well as content, I think it is a W. But I do think they missed the mark by forcing players to play in solo operations. So that's the video. I appreciate you guys for watching. If you're interested in more first Descendant tips, tricks, and news, be sure to like and subscribe. That's all I have for today. Peace.